Okay, so this is designing a garden. It's a two-part series. Tonight is part one. So we're going to be covering site assessment, developing personal style, and intro to garden design styles and concepts. Okay, so these are the components of site assessment. We can't really dive into the fun part of garden design without first focusing in a little bit on the site assessment. So these are just some of the topics that I will touch on before we get into the styles and the concepts and the more artistic qualities of garden design. If you have a pen and paper, I would suggest grabbing them and you could jot down a couple notes, or I would even take some time and maybe draw, if you have in your mind a space that you're thinking that you would like to design a garden for, and that's why you're taking this class. I would take a minute and draw just a very basic, like, bubble diagram of your property or the property that you're going to work on, the garden space, just so you have some sort of context while I'm going over all the different concepts. And then in your mind, you can make a more informed plan throughout the class. Um, that's helpful for me. I'm a very visual learner. I just took a garden design class at Cornell, so it's all very fresh in my mind. And this was one of the tools that kind of helped me in the beginning. Um, yeah, mapping it out just helps me. Yeah. So you can, jot that down here. I'm gonna actually show you what I mean by bubble diagram so that this just very simple, nothing, you don't have to be a great artist, just, where your house is, or, your garden, whatever space it is that you're thinking that you're going to design. Okay. So we'll go over wind, climate or microclimate, sun exposure, soil characteristics, which includes or if there's any compaction, slopes, gardening on a slope, or dealing with wildlife and pests. So the first thing that I'll talk about is so wind is very helpful for seedlings and it makes them more sturdy and stronger, but too strong of a wind or gusty winds can snap or damage plants and trees. So that's why we're concerned about the wind in a space that we are gardening in. Ornamental grasses can usually withstand windy spots and create a nice, flowy, whimsical look. And you can also create windbreaks with structures like fences or walls if you're not into ornamental grasses. So when you're determining the hours of sunlight in your space, you want to observe the potential planting space over the course of a day. So from sunrise to sunset, you want to get out there every hour, every couple of hours, and just take note of if it's dappled light, direct sunlight, if there's shady spots. I would say don't do this on a cloudy day. Try to do this on a day where there's like blue skies, not a cloud in the sky, because it's sometimes difficult to determine if it's shade from a tree or shade from a cloud that's passing by. Full sun is usually 6 to 8 plus hours of direct sunlight a day, and south facing spots get the most sun. So you want to make note of that in your sketch also. Success in a garden begins with the consideration of the soil and the environment. You want to consider wires, any obstructions that are in the space, irrigation systems, underground things happening, patterns of light and shade, sun exposure, temperature, frost state, microclimate, some of the things that I listed above. This link right here, I could send it to everybody afterwards, but he kind of goes through a very like simple way to make a sun map of your garden. And this is one of the pictures that he posted of his yard, and you can see, like, in the morning there's like that dappled light, it's not full sun, and then towards later in the day you can see he gets like, two of the images have probably full direct sunlight, but that's really it. So, and when I talk about microclimates, I think most of Sullivan County is 6B, but oh, sorry, let me let this person in the room. But it varies if you're in the north or south part of the county. But when we talk about microclimates, if you are next to a large body of water, or your house is, there's a pond. If you're in a more urban part of the county with a lot of blacktop and less trees, these can impact temperature and water supply, and they provide an environment for a microclimate to form. So, in your home garden, if there's ponds, like if your neighbor has a building, if there's fences, patios, blacktop, those will all contribute to a microclimate. And it's actually a great idea if you are looking to build a new garden to look and see what is working for your testing your soil. So determining soil type. Uh, when you're testing your soil, you're gonna determine soil type and get figure out your pH, and then we'll talk more about micronutrients and organic matter in a minute. But if you want to test your soil type, basically you take a handful of moist, not like super wet, but like, damp soil, and you're gonna squeeze it in your hand and then open your hand. And if it holds its shape, then you either have loamy or clayey soil. If you poke it and it falls apart, then you're very lucky. You have loamy soil, which is like the best soil that you can have. If you squeeze it and it holds its shape and you poke it and it's still not falling apart, then you have probably a lot of clay elements to your soil. And if you squeeze it and it falls and you let go and it falls apart immediately, then you have sandy soil. Which you can amend all these things, but it's just good to know what you're working with. And then when you're testing soil drainage, there's a couple different ways that you can do that, but this is the easiest way. I would say to dig a hole about 6 inches wide, 1 foot deep, fill the hole with water, let it drain completely, and then do it again and see how many hours it takes to drain. And that will determine if you have good or bad drainage. Most people have adequate drainage. Um, Yes, but we do soil testing at Cornell. We send it out to a company called Dairy One, and they're great. They usually take about a week or two. They will give you your amount of organic matter, your level of micronutrients, and they will give you a tailored recommendation of amendments that you can make based on what you would like to grow or what you're already growing. So if you need a little bit more of an acidic soil, they'll let you know what you should be adding, or if you need more alkaline soil, they'll let you know what you should be adding or taking away or whatever it is that you need. They ask you to determine your texture, the drainage, and then you can let them know. You can see there's a list on the left, and you can let them know what you're gonna grow, and they will tailor it. Um, I'm just gonna let these people in as they pop up. Yes, so there also is another company that does soil testing. I think they're called Adirondack something. I forget exactly the name, but if anyone is interested in using them, they do chemical soil testing. Dairy One doesn't cover that. They just cover like what's in your soil as far as micronutrients, organic matter, and the pH. They'll tell you the pH. But if you were worried that your soil was contaminated with something, you can send it to a company. I think it's called Adirondack Environmental Services. I'm not exactly sure what they charge, but the Dairy One testing is pretty inexpensive. It's less than 20 bucks most of the time. Um, yes. So soil composition is important in that you don't want you want space for water and air to penetrate because that's how the roots penetrate the soil. And if you have compacted soil, then that's a problem for plants. They're not usually able to get those strong, sturdy, deep roots that you want. Um, so what you do is you just kind of get a spade and stick it in the dirt and see how easy it is to maneuver that soil. If it's pretty difficult, then you might think about aerating or um, using like a garden fork to mix that soil up. You could consider using a rototiller too if it's extremely compacted, but if it's not, I would warn against that because I think that they do more harm than good sometimes. I think some people are just like obsessed with tilling their soil every year and it's not really necessary if unless your soil is like super compacted. So um, oh yeah, I'm sorry. 6A, not 6B. I said 6B before. So yeah, I'm in zone 6A. I live in Hurleyville. But you can see on my mouse work, yeah. You can see on the map of Sullivan County, the north part of the county is 5B, and there's some parts in the south that are 6A. So anything that grows in zone 5 or 6 usually is okay here, depending on where you are. Um, I just read that actually the USA updated their planting zones this year, so that's kind of crazy. But yeah, we I guess a lot of gardeners and farmers that I know, they use the rule that, like, don't plant anything until after Memorial Day, which is usually a good rule of thumb, but I think we had a late frost this past year that was really damaging to a lot of people who were just assuming that things were fine and they can put all their stuff in the ground. I actually killed some of my plants in our greenhouse this year because I was like, "They're gonna be fine," and they were not. So, it's good to keep this in mind also when planting. And then we have slopes, which was I think this was the last thing on the list there. Uh, gardening on a slope, a lot of people will build stairs or a retaining wall or something just to eliminate it whatsoever because they're really hard to garden on. But if you don't want to do that, there are plants that are really great on a slope and they will help with erosion. Ornamental grasses are great, creeping juniper, forsythia, willow, um, fern, yarrow. There's a bunch that are great for a slope. Oh, and then pests in the garden. So you want to also keep in mind on your little bubble diagram what pests you come across in your yard or your gardening space. I have everything here. Everything eats all my plants constantly all the time. So everything I grow has to be either up on the deck in a container or completely fenced around and like, nothing can penetrate it. Especially if you're planting young trees, you want to definitely protect them. There's so many deer and I have these awful my daughter thinks they're really cute, the groundhogs, they're everywhere, but she thinks they're really cute when they run around the garden, but I don't think they're so cute because they eat all my stuff. The chipmunks eat all my stuff, the squirrels eat all my everything. I just, I have it's just like nothing but wildlife constantly that I'm up against. And I'm sure you guys probably all have the same problems, but there are plants that are deer resistant or, you know, they say they're deer resistant, but if a deer is hungry enough, it'll probably eat anything. I've had really great luck with any like scented herb. Um, I am going to try this year creating an herb barrier around my garden to see if that helps because if there's a bunch of mint and lavender and basil around all of my vegetables, maybe they won't even bother with my vegetables. Um, yeah. So, like I said before, if you don't want to deal with tilling your soil and having to rip it all up and using all that elbow grease, this is a great method for just killing weeds and also enriching your soil that you want to use or your space that you want to use to build a garden. Um, you can put down cardboard and then throw compost and mulch over that. And if you leave it for like 3, 4 months, it's going to be like an amazing space to garden in. Most of the weeds will be smothered in that time period, the soil is gonna become enriched with, from the compost and the mulch, and the cardboard will just disintegrate. So you can just, after a couple of months, you could just stick a shovel right through it and it's super soft. So this is like my favorite way to get a garden space ready. Okay, yeah, this is that picture I showed you before. So you get an idea of, you know, what what how you want to utilize your space and what you're looking at. Yeah, all those components that I just spoke about will determine your plant selection. And that piece is important because you don't want to plant things that aren't going to thrive in your space. And in order to know if a plant's going to thrive, you have to know your soil pH, your drainage, how much sun they're going to get. Yeah, so we want to choose plants that are going to thrive and have their needs met in our space, which plant selection will cover in the second part of this series. But for now, we'll continue to focus on site assessment, and then we're going to move on to collecting inspiration and elements of design. Um, so yeah, like I mentioned earlier, creating a basic site sketch will help give context around the design. Um, these are some of the things that you can label on your sketch. Once you're ready to move on to graph paper is probably the best way to plan a garden in like a serious way because you can make it to scale. Like every box can be a square foot, or every box can be 4 square foot, depending on how big your space is. But you want to label which way the sun, or I'm sorry, which way is north, label the soil issue areas, what kind you want to list, what kind of wildlife you're coming up against. You also want to put on the map what plants are existing in the space, and especially if they're going to stay. Uh, yeah, so this is kind of a more like a level up from the bubble diagram, but this will really get your creative juices flowing, just so you can like kind of see like, okay, like if you want more than one garden space, or if you're just looking to decorate the front of your home or the front of a space, uh, you know, where do you want your flower beds? Where do you want your vegetables grown? Do you even want to grow vegetables? Are you looking for like an edible garden that will supply food for hundreds of years? You could plant some apple trees. I know that the pawpaw is having a big resurgence, I've heard. So that's kind of cool. Um, but yeah. So collecting inspiration. So this is the kind of where the fun part comes in. You always want to keep in mind that garden design is a four-dimensional art form. So any plans that you make, if you're a seasoned gardener, or you've planted vegetables or flowers before, you plant them and sometimes they don't survive. Sometimes they don't die and you have to like rethink your garden plan. So it's a dynamic art form. It's always going to be changing. So you can think, what's what works in my area? Do I want a structured garden or open aspect? The best way to do this is to visit a nursery, because they'll be able to tell you what is native, or usually they'll be able to tell you what is native, what works well in the area, what's very popular. Walking around a park, a lot of parks will have like labeled sort of like botanical garden style gardens where you can see what exactly is there. I think the native plantings they're starting to see a resurgence too. A lot of people are into planting pollinator gardens, native gardens, bird gardens. But again, walking around your neighborhood, seeing what grows really well for your neighbors or your microclimate. Instagram is great to look, if you just like look up like hashtag garden design or hashtag like pollinator garden, whatever it is that you're looking for, whatever kind of style that you need inspiration from. Google, obviously. But also something you want to think about is how much maintenance or financial investment are you willing to put into a space? Because as some of you probably know, designing a garden and then going and buying the plants and putting them in the ground it's an enormous like, physically challenging task, but it's also extremely expensive, um, unless you're growing from seed, which is a great idea. I will help anybody who is looking to grow from seed. Um, yeah, so it just takes much longer. You're not gonna have that instant gratification of like, "Oh my god, I bought this beautiful bush, these beautiful flowers, and now they're in my garden and they look amazing." If you're starting from seed, it's with perennials, they take 2 to 3 years to really, like, get going. Annuals obviously are much quicker, but they're not gonna stay you'll have to plant them every year. But also, is there like a specific style that you want to create? Do you like a more formal garden? Do you want a more meadowy cottage style, a Mediterranean, Japanese? Um, I know Japanese maples. I grew up on Long Island, and Japanese maples are in like every single front yard, probably in the whole entire island. So they're super popular. Um, but you start to like notice trends and see what works and what doesn't. Like crepe myrtles, just I guess because of climate change, they just started really thriving in Long Island. So now you see them everywhere, and they are so beautiful. But it's just crazy because uh you no longer see paper birches really so much in Long Island, it's too hot for them, and, like, growing up, they were all over, and now they're gone. So, it's interesting that now the paper birch has been replaced by crepe myrtle. Um, so yeah, uh, what are your intentions? What do you wanna create? Do you wanna create a space with shade and breeze coming, like, to get, like, calm from the summer sun? Do you want a space to entertain? Are you looking to set up, a barbecue and a table, a bench, chairs, patio furniture? Are you looking for privacy? Do you want to create a productive space where you can harvest fruit, vegetables, cut flowers? Do you want a perennial garden that you won't really have to touch and you can just watch it bloom every year and it'll get more and more beautiful every year and then eventually it'll like be out of control and you'll have to split the perennials? Or are you looking to create like a meditative, relaxing spot with privacy so that you don't have to look at your neighbor's yard or see them? So yeah, these are all things to think about when you are planning a garden space. So this is the cloisters. This is I like my dad used to take me here when I was a kid and I absolutely love the cloisters. I just think it's so beautiful. But this is in Northwest Manhattan on the Hudson River. This would be considered a classic formal style garden, highly manicured, has a central axis in the center with a stone structure in the middle. There's like I said, highly manicured bushes, trees, topiary, which topiary is just like a fancy word for trimming a bush or tree into the shape of something. So if you ever like in Edward Scissorhands when he cuts the hedges into like dinosaurs and all these crazy things, that's that's what that is. So yeah, I love the city, but this is like one of my when I lived in the city, this was one of my favorite places to go just to, like, escape the concrete jungle. Now my thing's not working. Why can't I? Oh, okay, so this is another example of a formal style garden. You can see the highly manicured little bushes. Um, but yeah, it has a lot of symmetry, and then there's a focal point in the center. It's pretty much mirrored on both sides. So that is definitely a look that a lot of people try to replicate for their home. Um, it's beautiful. It's just a lot of work. And then we have Japanese Zen gardens. They contain elements of like Eastern philosophical statues, reflective pools. They have more asymmetry in design. You're not going to see that mirrored type of image in a Japanese Zen garden. They usually have gravel or stepping stones or stepping stones in gravel. Falling water is a big element they like to use. A lot of ornamental grasses, Japanese maples. they have a more relaxing meditative vibe. There's not usually like a ton of flowers. It's usually more uh green plants, like not flowering plants. This is another this is like a more simple, basic Japanese garden, but it's still beautiful. It's very simple. You see the stepping stones and uh I would advise anybody against planting bamboo because it's invasive. uh and then these two are like more cottage style gardens. You can see they have like abundant plantings. They're very colorful, romantic. They have more of a rustic feel, kind of a more like meadowy, natural kind of look. Some of them are like have like kind of that like overgrown look, like the plants are just like spilling out into the path. But they use natural stone, natural wood materials, more of like style, a rustic feel. Like a lot of people will use repurposed wood for these spaces, or use like a clover lawn instead of grass lawn. And then you also see like a lot of natives in these gardens. People will just because you can get that like kind of romantic, flowy, whimsical feel using native plants. So, uh, and then also another one that's growing in popularity is the edible garden. Ornamentals can be very beautiful, but more and more, I think people are trying to plant gardens with function, which we'll talk more about that in the second part of this series, but pollinator gardens, bird gardens, edible gardens, you can grow veggies, fruit trees, have like fresh herbs available, even edible flowers, berry bushes, blueberries are native over here, so there's a lot of benefit to planting them. They have those really beautiful little white flowers, and you feed the birds. It's like a win-win, the birds like to eat them, you like to eat them. But yeah, pollinator gardens and native gardens go hand in hand. They both support native pollinators or birds. They support biodiversity and ecological resilience, which we need more of now because of not only climate change, but also all the invasives that are starting to really be a problem. I'm sure everybody sees the Japanese knotweed everywhere. I'm sure this summer we're going to see like an explosion of the spotted lanternfly because Sullivan County's been pretty untouched by them when compared to like Westchester and other places. But yeah, this is Mediterranean. This is like all of the gardens, and I lived in San Diego for a while, and all of the gardens there have this Mediterranean look. They're so beautiful. They have a lot of gravel, clay pots, or structures. They plant a lot of drought resistant type plants because they don't get a lot of rain there. But a lot of the foliage is like silvery or lavender, and they use a lot of ornamental grasses because a lot of those are drought resistant. But yeah, this isn't a comprehensive list of all the different garden styles. This is just a few of the popular ones that will get you kind of, you could start looking into, see what other, there's modern, there's French, there's Italian, which they kind of fall under formal, the formal, like the cloisters that I showed you. My older sister was an art major, and she probably would yell at me because I'm sure that there's a lot of art history there that I'm skipping over. Um, but yeah, so by looking at the different styles, Googling, researching, going on Instagram or wherever, going to local nurseries, which are not open yet, unfortunately, but they will be soon. But by looking at all these various styles, you can kind of start to figure out which style appeals to you and what would work in your space, whether it's small or large, or you want one garden or 17 gardens. Um, you have to set expectations like I talked about earlier, the financial burden or financial investment of creating a garden or a patio or anything, manipulating your space like that, it can get extremely expensive, but there are very inexpensive ways to do it also. Um, I think that the gravel with the pavers, it's like kind of a DIY way to get your space a little bit more just like put together looking, but you can see that the garden on the right is probably like a fairly new garden. There's little tiny plants there. There's a lot of open space. You can always fill in open space while you're waiting for plants to establish. You can always fill them in with annuals because you plant this garden, you work this so hard, and you have to like wait all these years for these perennials to like do their thing or these trees to become mature. And in the meantime, it's a smart idea to fill in the spaces with annuals because they're super easy to grow. It's a great way to build your confidence as a gardener. Um, they'll just they'll just like pop up and just be beautiful, and then you can pick a new annual for the next year while you wait for your garden to establish. Um, but yeah, you can start to think about how will I achieve unity in my design? What kind of maintenance am I looking to sign up for? Um, Actually maintaining a perennial uh garden is probably a lot easier than even having a lawn because once it's in there, you don't really have to do much unless it starts to become like overgrown and then you just have to split it. But it's much less work than having to mow your lawn 2 or 3 times a week, all summer. So yeah. But yeah, so yeah, this is just a garden that I thought was really beautiful that just more inspiration for anyone looking to like, create privacy or just, have a nice manicured look in their lawn. Um, these are some ornamental grasses. These are great for like privacy too, and they just look so pretty when they blow in the wind. Um, but yeah, you always want to keep in mind when you're thinking about planting your garden that it's going to look different on planting day versus like 5 years of growth. So again, you can insert annuals into empty spaces, but it's a dynamic art form. So you want to just like be patient and know that it's going to grow in time and like a little baby, it'll just change. So, okay. So, now we'll get into the elements of design. So, scale and proportion. So a single story home would probably be better suited to a medium-sized tree or a dwarf-sized tree, maybe not like a large oak or maple or a full size, anything like anything that's full size. It would probably dwarf the tree and look kind of silly if you're looking for a more curated, um, in scale kind of look. Um, but however, those big, large trees might look great around, a 3-story home or a 2-story colonial or, one of these older houses that we have a lot of around here. So you always want to consider the size of plants at or trees at maturity because when you plant them, they're obviously going to grow and not stay that small unless you get a dwarf um cultivar. So, yeah, you consider the perception and the context of the garden in terms of what's around it. How big does it seem in its space? How big do you want it to seem in its space? Um, if you put if you have a small yard and you want it to seem longer and you put a tiny bench at the end of the yard, your yard is going to seem much longer and then bigger. But if you put a huge bench at the end of your yard, it's going to it's going to shorten your yard. So there's different tricks and like optical illusions you can use to make your home seem bigger or smaller. I think the house on the left is 1 story, and you can see that I think the garden is stunning. stunning. It looks beautiful. But it, it's that's one look that you can see on the left, but on the right, you see the plants are still small, so it has a different feel. It just looks, it makes the house on the right look a little bit bigger, whereas the house on the left seems a little smaller. I mean, it depends what you're going for. It's just uh, something I wanted to point out. Um, Texture. So different texture captures light in various ways. Leaf texture makes sunlight and shadow play a role in the garden's appearance. A coarse texture is going to be like hostas, rhododendron, and they kind of can create a backdrop for a smaller texture or a finer texture, like dill or baby's breath. Um, but you can also play with texture by using materials. So you can see the bottom picture, there is like the smooth stone and the gravel, and then you have the brick. So you can see that it kind of creates its own type of look or feel without even using plants. There's, just to see that makes, it makes it have a certain vibe. But you can use like edging, walkways, a straight and wide walkway has like a more formal feel, whereas like a more curvy and meandering, made with like natural materials, has a more like inviting, romantic kind of feel, a little more intimate. Symmetry and balance. So like we saw in the formal in at the cloisters, symmetrical plantings place equal emphasis on either side of the axis. You can see on the right, this is kind of like, I think this is a French style garden, but it's like a mirror image on both sides. You have the wide, straight path. It's very like, it looks beautiful. It's very formal. But then you have the garden on the left, which feels a little bit more adventurous. It has like a romantic feel. It has that meandering, like winding path. But the way that it's easier to create unity in a design by repeating plants. So, there's no question the photo on the right, like, looks like a cohesive design. Everything looks like it's in its place. And on the left, it doesn't necessarily match. So it's depends on what you like. I mean, I like the one on the left. The one on the right is beautiful too. Um, it looks it just looks very formal. So it depends what you prefer. And if you like a more natural, kind of like messy, a little bit garden, then maybe you like asymmetrical. You don't so much like the mirrored image. Color. Okay. So you have color, I guess, is the most subjective and personal aspect of garden design. I've always dreamt of having an all purple garden or an all black garden, which it's like funny now to think about because now they actually sell like seed packets where you can like throw seeds down and it's like all black flowers come up. Um, but yeah, the a lot of classical garden designers would cringe at that, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so you have to plant what makes you happy and what you like. But understanding the relationship between colors and the color wheel will help you choose a palette that is aesthetically pleasing not only to you but to people that are walking by your garden. The monochrome garden is great because it kind of takes the guesswork out of it. You just choose all shades of purple or all shades of red, and it has a cohesive feel. There's a lot of unity. It's easy to, see that, oh, this was like a planned space. This is a red garden, or this is a purple garden or a blue garden. um But then you also can use complementary color. So you never really want to use completely opposite colors on the color wheel. Like you can see this yellow is kind of closest to this one. But the purple is this one. So it's like not quite opposite. It's almost opposite. Because they say opposite, if you use like directly opposite colors, it kind of like is not easy on the eyes, kind of makes your eyes strain a little bit and it's hard to look at. So when you are using complementary colors, you don't want to use exact opposites, or so they say. Um, but yeah, also you can use tricks to kind of brighten up dark spaces. Um, if you want to plant like light colored flowers in a shady spot, your in your garden, it'll appear to lighten the space. So it won't look so maybe like depressing or however, whatever look you're going for. Here's another monochrome garden that I just thought was really beautiful. But you can see the difference between, for example, the garden on the right that has like these bright, vibrant orange, yellow, like reds. It feels very energizing. It's vibrant. It's like super colorful. And then, when you compare that to like the subdued hues of the purple, which is a little bit more like calm, a little more relaxed. So you can achieve that feel just using color. Um, yeah. So the last part that I'll talk about today are structural. I didn't realize I could just X that out. Structural elements and shapes. And using these in the garden can really help to enhance your space. So I think I mentioned probably like a million times before already, but using like I love putting a curvy path in my garden or just anywhere because it's just I don't know. There's something like inviting and like mysterious and like romantic about a nice meandering curvy path. Um, but it also provides like a different view from every different space. And a lot of people who want like pools or ponds will especially use curves because you get a different view everywhere you look. Um, but there's a lot of different structures or elements that you can add to change the look or the feel of your space. The bottom one, this person has retaining walls. I don't know if maybe there was a slope or a hill there that they didn't want to deal with, so they just had these walls built, and it looks a little more formal, but it still looks great. The natural stone too. These are, a lot of these gardens now, you like because we have YouTube, it's so easy just to watch a video and be like, I can do this myself. But I will say that if you are going to try to put a walkway down, don't forget the weed barrier because you don't want to deal with those weeds coming up in your path unless you're going for that look, unless you want like the meadow natural type of look. Yeah, so I guess if there's any more questions, I can take those, but that's my presentation for the night, which, oh wow, I have 5 minutes left. But next week we're going to talk about putting it all together, plant selection, and I have a few great plant selection tools that I can share with you guys that there's some botanical gardens and also some other extensions that you can literally just like filter. Okay, I have well draining soil, full shade, and I'm looking for a shrub. And you can just put all those things in and it'll come up with a list of plants that will fit in that space. So we'll take some time to play with that tool a little bit. And then I'll talk more about gardens with specific functions and how to achieve the function of a garden. I'm actually planning an edible garden for Cornell Cooperative Extension. So if anyone's interested in that, that should be, I'm hoping, built this summer, but I'll be holding a class. So I'm gonna try my best to plant all natives. But it should be a really great space that will promote people to grow uh gardens that they can eat and not just look at. So, okay, I guess that's it. So I'll see you guys next week.